Hi, my name's Chris Mcleod, and I'm really excited to speak to you at the Right Here, Right Now Global Youth Climate Summit. And what I'm going to talk around is climate and sport. Just a way of an intro. Um, I took part in the Oxford Scenarios program at Said Business School, but most of my professional life I've worked in elite sport, so for 20 odd years, across a whole range of sports and across a whole range of roles. And what most interests me and excites me about working in sport is whether you're working with an individual, a team, or an organization. Often you're pursuing an aspirational goal that people don't know whether you can do or not, and always in an uncertain future. So while the link between climate and sport might not be obvious, hopefully in our time together we'll find some useful links and talk through how they might influence each other. So I'm really looking forward to getting into the questions, and I'll do my best to answer them in a way that hopefully adds value to what you're planning and the work that you're planning to do. So let's get right into questions. Question one. It's looking through, how is climate change already impacting the world of sport, from athletes, events, and infrastructure? So already you can feel the effect of climate change on elite sport. And I guess it's probably in three different ways. There's how it's affecting now, which you can see examples like the US Open now have a extreme heat break for players due to rising temperatures. Recently, the Olympic Games in France, the swim in a triathlon had to be moved repeatedly on days because of water pollution. Cycling events have had to move because of forest fires. So already you can start to feel the effect within sports. And then if we think forwards to what organizations and sports are thinking about the future, two examples that would jump to mind is one, winter sports. And I read a stat last week that in 2050, there's a prediction that half the hosts that would host the Winter Olympics by that time will not be able to, due to lack of ice and snow. And then also looking at the sports and sporting venues across the world, with rising sea levels, the impact of floodplains and how that might change is also going to impact, one, where sports can be played, and also the type of sports that might be possible in certain parts of the world and certain parts of countries later. And finally, how it's impacting sports. We've talked about the present and what might happen in the future. There's also the challenge and the critique of sports. Obviously, sports happened around the world, and there's lots of travel. And if we take two events like the Olympic Paralympics, it would have a carbon footprint with so many nations and so many athletes, and so many people come to watch from around the world. And another striking example would also be Formula One. So there's the challenges that climate change is presenting for sports, but also the challenge to sports in terms of its carbon footprint and its impact on climate. So there's lots of things already in play. Question two, what role can sport play in shaping public awareness and culture around climate change? One of the interesting things about sport is its stubbornness and stability might be the best term. Whether it's the Olympic, Paralympic Games, no matter what seems to be going on in the world, every 4 years, I get the most recent count, up to 200 nations will meet to take part in sport and activity for 4 to 6 weeks, which is fascinating. So what you have is this stability and rhythm of sport against all the uncertainty and change within the world. And even most recently, even in the midst of a global pandemic, the Tokyo Games still happened, and people travelled around the world to compete in sport. So a couple of things. Firstly, That stability means it can give us clues all of the time around how climate and sport are interacting. But secondly, that stability gives a huge platform for influence. And then the second thing in there, I guess, outside of the platform of influence, is a sense of awe with sport, which might seem a strange place to go. But linking it to climate change, there's a classic first photo of the first time that we saw Earth from space. And people talk about the overview effect with that, with this sense of awe that it gave us in terms of how small that we felt, fragile the world looked. And it's been said that it instigated a shift in how we saw our planet and instigated change and action within a climate activism and organizations. And so this sense of awe when we saw the Earth, in a strange way, it's not the same, but people often watch sport for a sense of awe. They want to see what humans can do. They want to be inspired by what they can do. So the heart of both of those endeavors is this sense of awe. And I guess one of my thoughts is, how do we use that sense of awe from sport to work in a similar but different way around how we might work with each other and how we might see the planet? And I do think that we can, because both senses of awe mean that we see ourselves differently. We see potential in ourselves and in others, which has huge opportunities to instigate change. And two really interesting examples of that is a cross-country skier, gold medalist Jessie Diggin. She talks about the awe of taking part in sport and the surroundings that she's in. And if you get an opportunity to look her up in terms of her advocacy around climate issues, she's on the board with a organization called Protect Our Winters. So really nice example of the awe associated with the sporting event has allowed her to see the world in a particular way, which means that there's this passion to protect it. And then another example in the same realm will be Greg Long, who's a wave surfer. And again, a collaboration with organizations such as Sustainable Surf. So this sense of awe and how it might be used for good, and linked to this global audience of 1.5 billion people, I think, watch the World Cup final in football or soccer, depending on where you're watching this, gives sport a huge influence and how it might shape views towards climate. And then linking on from that, the next question is a really interesting one about what responsibility the major sport and organisations of events have to address their environmental impact. And I think with that one, more and more sports organisations, events are becoming more explicitly conscious around their responsibility. Whether that's Formula One, talking around how they are going to change their carbon footprint by 2030. Paris Games, talking about how they're going to be the greenest games ever. And I guess my hope is moving forwards that happens more and more often, because what sports can and do is they can innovate quickly when given the chance. So this balance between the aspirations of sport, the constraints that might be placed on them in terms of travel emissions, with this sense of awe and this need and passion to change, I would hope continues to drive innovation both in sport and allow sport to look externally for what innovation might support them in their climate challenges. So I think that's a really interesting one and where that might head. And then I mentioned at the start that I'm a alumni of the Oxford Scenarios program. So the next question is a link to that, interestingly, is how might scenario thinking help us imagine and prepare for the future of sport in a warming world? Um, I've been lucky enough over the last few years to be involved in work looking at the future of sport, and obviously climate always plays a part within the conversations of that. Now, what scenario thinking, especially Oxford approach, does is it encourages us to look at different plausible futures. That we'll all have a view of the future. If you just took a moment to think of how you might see the world, especially around climate change in the next 5 to 10 years, you might have a view of how that might be. And that view of how the world might be would shape how we act day in, day out. What we'll be passionate about, where we might act, and where we might choose to put our energy. But what the Oxford Scenarios approach would do is encourage us to look at different futures, both through questioning our own assumptions, but spending time with others that might think in different ways and listening to them describe how they might think the world will play out. And it's a really interesting and insightful way to start to engage with the uncertainty of the future. We don't know. We make best guesses all of the time. So this approach to sport and climate change is really interesting. How can we think differently about the future and have multiple plausible futures, and think, if each of those were to play out, what would that mean for the world? What would that mean for climate change? And what might that mean for sport? And the key thing is we're not trying to predict the future. We're acknowledging the uncertainty and just looking at what might plausibly happen. And from a sports perspective, you can start to look at different things. For example, in one future, there might be a future where sport is more restricted in terms of what it can do, linked to climate emissions. And so in that future, it might challenge us to think differently at the speed we might need to innovate. If this happened in 2-3 years, then we'd have to innovate at this speed in different times. In another future, there might be more options for virtual sport. So what would that look like, and what different challenges might that present? So this way of thinking really helps us to engage with uncertainty and look for different options. So I'd encourage you, if you've got the time or interest, even in small groups of friends, family, at school, to start to explore different perspectives on our future with regards to climate. And if you have an interest in sport, then start to look and go, okay, what would all of this mean for sport? And the most important thing then is it should change how we act within the future. Sorry, the present. So what options and opportunities might it give us now that we can begin to move on? And given the audience on this call, I think that's so interesting in terms of how can we think differently about using sport as a lever or an instigator for change and action. Final 2 questions. What advice would I give to young people who want to build climate resilience in sectors that might not be traditionally green? Linked to what I said, I'd probably think about a couple of things. The first one is I would advocate for any exercise within those industries where you can encourage people to think about how the future might be different than they currently think, especially around the climate, and then bring it back to, okay, what might that mean for now? And then secondly, I guess how I've linked to how I've tried to articulate this sense of awe within sport. What is in that industry that draws people towards it? What is unique within that industry, whether it's a platform, whether it's a emotion that it gives people, whether it's its scale across multiple nations. What's the thing that could be used as a instigator of change? And within that, how could that be viewed differently and used in different ways to affect climate change? And I think broadly, my response to that would be utilize and voice your different perspectives, because in the wrestle between the different perspectives, I think new creative options can emerge. And then finally, if you were to imagine a climate positive sports future in 10 years, what would it look like? I think a climate positive sports future, at the heart of sport, although elite sport is a business and it has sponsors and often it's there to make profit, at the heart of sport is this sense of personal and collective awe, like I've said, but also a human connection. There's a reason people want to travel to watch sport. There's a reason people want to connect around sport. So climate positive sports future, I think, finds new and novel ways to still keep those two aspects, the sense of awe and a connection. And I think there'll be lots of opportunities for technology to influence that. How can we keep those two things in a way that might decrease emissions and the carbon footprint of sport? And I would hope over the next 5 to 10 years, some of the larger sports have been the drivers of innovation and change around how we might still operate on a global level while still reducing our carbon footprint. So that's me. I've really enjoyed the questions. I hope you found some value in it. And for those of you that have a particular passion for sport, I definitely encourage you to use it, go with it. And I then encourage you to look at especially elite sport in new and novel ways that other people might not be thinking about, and use your voice, use your opportunities to instigate change where you can. Enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you for your time.